Hello, this is the Blast Report podcast on all things blasting. My name is Evan Tebow with New Wave Consulting, and I want to thank all the drill and blast teams along with those supporting them who are out there on the pattern. The production team at Blast Think and I would like to welcome you to today's episode of the Blast Report podcast.
I have thought, because you talked about Vic Bryant being such a good guy, he was a very much to hang on to electric caps. He was a big electric cap shooter.
Yes.
You know, he was into the you can't check it stuff.
Here's the cool thing about being involved in this business for so many years is that if you want to talk about an innovation that has changed in the explosive industry in the last 40 years, it's been detonators. I started out with the old Atlas Rockmasters, the old electric caps.
Yeah.
And they were the best of terrible, I guess is the best way to put it. At least a number 2 would go off before a number 3 would, but that's about as close as you could get.
That's right.
Then I never forget this. Irico came up with the first, because they did a lot of stuff for the Defense Department as well, the first pressed delay steel sleeve delay element in a blasting cap. And when I was up in Massachusetts, they came to me and said, "We want you to shoot these, and you tell us what you think about how they work." I said, "Okay." So I shot a lot of sequential timer shots, and so I just took the caps out, and I was freaking amazed because you could actually see each individual hole shoot in the face. Before, the whole face just kind of all just washed out. I mean, it was just, okay, so it started here and went to there, but that's pretty much all you could tell about it.
Yeah.
So you could actually now see each individual hole along the face detonate.
Mm-hmm.
Then fast forward, and Mick and I had this conversation. Remember this, Mick? We had this conversation down in New Orleans when we were down there for, who was it that had the blasting training company that, out of Pennsylvania? What was his name?
And he was what? We're talking about a distributor?
No.
Corey Academy?
Who was that?
Corey Academy?
No. He had an explode. I was working for Martin at that time. I met you down there, and what was his name?
That's okay.
Anyway, so you asked me at that time, we were talking, and you asked me, you said, "Mike," you said, "what do you think about because all the instrumentation and everything that was going on," you said, "where do you think we are with the explosives industry as a whole and understanding what explosives does?" And I said, "Mick, we will never, ever figure out how to use explosives until we get timing down pat. Until we get accurate timing, it's all subjective." Because you can't, because it is so subjective, you have an unknown element that you can't control. Because this cap that's supposed to shoot at 500 milliseconds is going to shoot at 494 or 506. You have no idea.
Right.
And it's such a broad range. So in the last 40 years, without a doubt, the biggest advance in blasting has been electronic detonators.
Oh my.
Because now you can actually go out and understand how it affects the rock.
Mm-hmm.
That is the biggest change that we've seen. And I have an issue because, and I've heard this before, is that I'll go out and I may shoot an electronic shot with non-L timing.
Mm-hmm.
I may just go out and shoot it that way. I might shoot 25 down the face and 67 back.
Yeah.
And guys say, "Well, you're shooting a non-L shot." No, I'm not. Because there is absolutely no way that a pyrotechnic cap can emulate the timing accuracy of an electronic.
Right.
So electronics gave to the industry the understanding of rock mechanics. We always had theory. We always thought we knew what happened. But until we had electronic caps, that really, really cemented where we thought we need to be with timing. So in 40 years, that is the biggest change that has come to the explosives industry. And it doesn't matter if you're talking dynamites or cast boosters, or it doesn't matter what you're talking about. If you want to talk about something that has changed this industry, it's electronic caps. They're absolutely amazing.
So it's cool. What's the first electronic detonator you shot, Mike? Remember what year, when it was?
It was in New Zealand, and it was Sasol. They're still manufactured in South Africa at that time.
Okay.
And then they were bought by Atlas Powder Company. So it was the old Chinese finger clips. It was kind of an archaic system. So what it was is that I had a couple of good friends that from New Zealand, and they were interested in buying Unitronics from Sasol. So they had representation. A guy lived up someplace in New England, and just up there doing something, whatever, I had no idea. But anyway, but they wanted, bad timing, because they wanted to buy the Unitronics from Sasol and have me start marketing that for them in the States. So I went over and spent 2 weeks over in New Zealand, just understanding the system and working with the different locations and stuff. In the meantime, they wanted to buy it from Sasol on a pay-as-you-go plan, and Orca or Dyna, whoever it was, Atlas, whoever, Orca, I think at that time, just walked and said, "Here's your check," and so they sold it to Orca.
Orca bought it.
Yes. Now, Orca at the time had the Icon system, but this was their go to the coal strip and sell not so fancy, hook it up this way and shoot it cap. And so that's why they ended up, but it really didn't change the effect of the cap. So just because, so without question, the biggest change, advancement we've seen in the industry in the last 40 years has been the electronic detonators, by no stretch of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because then we could
not even
finally
arguable.
What's that?
You can't even argue that.
No.
It's
No.
not even debatable.
No.
Yeah, Davy Bickford
Mm-hmm.
was probably the first one to say, you should. I mean, Davy Bickford was doing the same thing that Trojan was doing. They were coming into the industry saying, you should be using electronic detonators. And the big boys were saying, well, maybe,
Yeah.
Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
Since we don't have one, we don't think you ought to really. And so basically, Davy Bickford was fighting.
Why would I
against the
pay
current.
$37 for a
For
cap that I can pay $7
And I'm gonna
for?
blow it up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Why would I do that?
Yeah. So I give them credit. I salute them. This in the early 90s
Mhm.
when Davy Bickford came out with an electronic detonator, but the cost prohibitive. And the only way they could be successful was if the end user, let's say, like, in fact, we used them at the CDC down there in Georgia.
Mhm.
Well, if you go to the CDC and say, okay, we're going to use this electronic detonator, it's going to cost more money, and you give them the reason why, okay, we'll pay it. The CDC will. So in other words, it really doesn't, it no longer requires, I mean, they're picking
It's
up
not
the
the
tab.
cost, it's the effect that's important.
Yeah, you passed it through. It definitely, the electronic detonator started out in the critical blasting areas, and God, now today, Peabody Coal, Vulcan Materials, Martin Marietta, all these big players, it is electronics.
Yes.
That debate,
And for good reason, for very good reason.
yeah, yeah. So that, okay. What really cool, Mike, is of course you always were a innovative, early adopter kind of guy. You think we just had this conversation here now for the last period of time, and you were on the leading edge of so many changes.
Yes.
And
for whatever reason.
Yeah, you were there. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, here you say it again, when you shot the first electronic detonator, and the majority of the industry probably never heard of an electronic detonator until 2010.
At that time, they hadn't.
Yeah.
And actually, that was 2004, I think.
Yeah, right.
When I started looking at it, and I was just, so what it was, I just had never thought about it because I never had the ability to do that. But that's the first time I was introduced into what's called panel blasting. And basically, so there's a mine on the North Island, a gold mine that had been there for 100 years. And the town had built up around the rim of it. the gold mine. Well, and they just kept, the deposit was deep. They kept going down and down and down. They're taking it in 20-foot lifts and 7-meter lifts, what do you want to call it? But anyway, the gold mine had to do something because there was absolutely no way they could control, and they had like a quarter of an inch peak particle velocity was their limit. So there's just so much of the stuff that I've learned from people that, so what they came up with the concept, they said, okay, well, let's study their vibrations. So they would look at the signature, and when the waveform reached a 2, not a 2.5, but a 2, they would stop the blast, stop it for like a second, and then they'd go again.
Wow.
And so when it got to that point again, they'd stop the blast again. So basically they were shooting 6 mini shots inside one shot. And each time they figured out at what duration of time when the frequency started building, and they would stop it, let that frequency pass underneath the structures, and then go again. It's the coolest thing I ever saw.
So it's almost like putting a heartbeat inside of your blasting production. You blast, let's say, 2 rows. As that would be heaving and moving, then the next 2 rows would fire, or whatever amount it would be.
Yes.
And they got that down so that they were just wave
yes. So
blasting,
when the response started building on itself, when it started coming up, and that's typically what happens with blast response, is that when enough of those waves started intersecting and started building a response, they shut it down, they'd stop it, and they wait until that. And I was thinking, you guys are nuts, you're going to throw a rock everywhere. Never did. So they shut down. I want to say around 200 milliseconds, I think, is what they'd actually stop the shot. They stopped the shot for 200 milliseconds, and then they'd go again. I watched them doing in construction outside of Auckland, the same thing. Only those shots we were pausing for a second and a half.
Now you see, that's in Australia.
It's New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Yeah. Auckland, New Zealand. Yeah. Those shots they'd pause for a second and a half. So they called panel blasting. They shoot this panel, stop it, wait for the vibration to go away, and then start
that before.
Just the coolest thing.
Yeah.
The point is, you could not do that before electronic caps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't think and I don't see anything in the foreseeable future. We're playing around with gas emulsions, which have come a long way from what they were years ago. Gas emulsions used to be terrible. I mean, just absolutely terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But they worked on long enough now. They're a viable product. They're a usable product. But as far as something that I can tell you that's a game changer in the industry is electronic caps. Again, we finally took the inaccuracy. It was all theory before then.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can actually take that and prove it.
Now it's interesting. So you brought in, the concept cast boosters, but you brought in cast boosters, and really that cast booster today is not a whole lot different than it was in 1985.
No, it isn't.
It's a penalite booster that you
Yes.
melt it down, put it in a container, it solidifies, and you got yourself
That's
a
it.
booster.
Yep. That's it.
It's interesting. We talk about all the changes that's been made now in manufacturing. You brought this up earlier, Mike, and absolutely we got better product out there today than we've ever had it as far as reliability. And back to your point, now Evan here has got a paper that he does on misfires, and unfortunately in misfires, the first thing you do is start pointing fingers at each other. I mean, just like they called you and said, your boosters won't work. Well, one of my boosters, your damn detonators, you know.
Or
you forgot to clip it in, and or you forgot to do that.
And we went through that unfortunate learning, or it was a tough learning curve on non-electrics, snapping them in, detonating cord, compatibility, all that kind of stuff. And we had failures, application failures. And, people didn't want to hear that. They just want to say, no, your damn product didn't work. And you're like, no, this is where But, and so you yourself, Mike, has had to be that technician.
Yes.
To investigate misfires.
Yes. The thing that the first thing you have to get people to understand is that there is not a detonator manufacturer that is going to put a even close to questionable product out in the market because there's just so much liability that's associated with that. So
Absolutely.
for people just to say, well, your damn detonators aren't working, no, that's probably not it, because
Yeah.
you can't, if you're going to do 100 shots on this construction project and 10 of them don't work, I'm going to be sued
Yes.
10 times
Yeah.
for one project. So the fact that you go to manufacturer, now, I'm not saying there can't be and shouldn't be, or maybe there is, but I can't really tell you in the last 10 years anyway, where I can point to misfire and say, manufacturer misfire.
Mhm.
Now, you may not know this, but at one time, Mick's old company, Ensign Bickford, said, no row shooting. You put your control down in front and hook your cats back. So that way, if you happen to have a bad shot, then you cut off 3 holes, not 50 holes.
That's
So
right.
what they're saying was,
We don't know.
we're not sure this test's going to work or not, so you might want to hook it up this way.
Yeah.
Well, that's changed a lot. And I've shot hundreds and hundreds of row shots since then, because the reliability of the system has become that much better than what it was to begin with.
Mhm.
You don't have to worry about putting the boxes flat so that the dust inside the tubes doesn't gather in one corner and blows the tube out. I mean, they've done a bunch of things to make the stuff so much better.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Blast Report podcast. I want to thank the team at Blast Think for producing this show, and please follow along for more episodes in the future, and share this podcast with your colleagues so we can continue to honor our industry and the people in it. Be safe and have a blast.